All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Brill. I'm the president of Bronx River Sound Shore Audubon Society. And thank you so much for joining us this evening for our speaker program. We are honored to have with us Dustin Partridge from New York City Bird Alliance to talk about creating bird habitat through green infrastructure in urban areas. I'm going to read Dustin's bio and then turn it over to him. Dr. Dustin Partridge, the Director of Conservation and Science at NYC Bird Alliance, is a pioneering scientist in urban green space conservation research in North America. His work, focused on wildlife conservation in New York City, has driven cities to reconsider the ecological value of small green spaces. Dr. Partridge's published research has reshaped the national conversation on the role of cities in conservation and led to significant policy changes in New York City. These include the passage of Local Laws 92 and 94, which mandate green roof and solar installations on new buildings, and the Green Roof Tax Abatement, which offers substantial financial incentives for green roof installations in high-need areas. An adjunct professor at Columbia University and a sought-after speaker in media and public forums, Dr. Partridge is a scientist whose approach to conservation is based in using science to drive solutions that benefit both wildlife and people. So thank you so much for being here tonight, Dustin. We are excited to hear your talk, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you all for having me. I'll share my screen and we'll jump right in to discuss the things that are happening in a space not far from where you all are, and some of the amazing finds that we are having in the city in green spaces that you probably wouldn't expect. I am the Director of Conservation and Science at New York City Bird Alliance. Let me pull this up. Sorry. The so we are the New York City chapter. I'll share a little bit about our organization in a little bit, but we're going to be talking about creating bird habitat in these kind of unusual, unexpected places.
The number of animals.
So I know there's a group of you that are really avid birders here. And I wanted to take a moment and just kind of see if you could just drop in the chat or maybe say it out loud what green space in our area, New York City, Westchester area, this might be. So this is a snapshot from a 1 hour outing in a green space where we saw October 16th, we saw 26 species. There were 5 sparrow species, 4 warbler species, 2 kinglet species. Some of the highlights were eastern phoebe, palm warbler, Cooper's hawk, blue jay, heron gull, and white crowned sparrow. Does anybody want to take a shot at guessing which green space this could have been? And you could unmute and guess.
Jamaica Bay or somewhere in Queens.
Yeah, it sounds like that.
Is it
But
somewhere in Central Park?
right, I actually love these guesses because it kind of goes to show how unexpected this is. This is on a green roof in Manhattan.
Oh,
Um, this is on top of the Javits Center. So right in Midtown Manhattan, 34th Street to about 38th Street, there's a rooftop up here that we're going to talk about that looks like this. It's a small space, but all of those birds were here in one quick survey this past fall in October. It's kind of unexpected. And yes, those are apples you see back there. There's a full apple orchard on this roof at this point. But it's not much larger than this, than what you can see right here. So this is kind of what we're going to talk about, kind of how these small green spaces can break our expectations about what might be habitat and how wildlife can use them, and also why it's important. So to back up a bit, I work at New York City Bird Alliance. So we are a chapter of National Audubon. And what makes us a little bit different is we're a fully staffed chapter. We have about 15 full-time staff members, and then we hire a full team of seasonal biologists through the summer field season. We work to protect wild birds and their habitats, focusing on the 5 boroughs of New York City and strengthening urban biodiversity and improving the city for all New Yorkers. And we do this through 3 kind of unique ways. We have a full science team. That's my role. I'm the Director of Conservation and Science. I have the amazing job of being able to oversee all of the science work we're doing across the city. We connect that data that we're collecting on the things that might be putting birds at risk or benefiting birds. We connect that data with our engaged audience. We engage about 10,000 people a year. And as you all know, birding's just so much fun. It's great to get out there. And this is a photo from the Christmas bird count that just shows the pure excitement that happens when you spot something. And then we connect this engaged audience that now knows about the science and data with advocacy, and we advocate for change. And it's how New York City has some of the most comprehensive bird safe building legislation in the entire nation. But oftentimes, and maybe there's some of you in here thinking of this as well, but how do you do conservation science in New York City, right? It's something that oftentimes people are surprised by. And this is what it looks like. So a lot of our time is dedicated to these three main areas. New York City and the area right by where where you all are based has the largest waterbird colonies in the entire Northeast. From having the vast majority of New York State's oystercatcher population nesting within New York City, to having incredible wading birds that are nesting right along the Bronx River at South Brother Island. It's the largest single colony in the entire Northeast right there. And that's true across the whole harbor. So we do a lot of work with wading birds. And I'm happy to speak anytime about all of those incredible birds that are out there. We also do a lot of work to reduce bird building collisions. Collisions kill over 1 billion birds across the US every year, and New York City accounts for about 250,000 of those. So a lot of our time is spent working with buildings to make them bird safe. But what we're here to talk about today is how we can use green infrastructure to create habitat, how you can kind of look at otherwise impervious surface and create something like this. This is also a green roof on top of a building. And this work is not just about New York City, right? The world is becoming more and more urban. This is a recently published part from the United Nations, a recently published report from the United Nations that shows how rapidly the world is urbanizing. And you can see just how fast cities have grown in the last 25 years or so, and how much faster they're growing. Cities are going to be where the majority of people live. They already are the place where the majority of people live, and they're going to continue to be even more so as the world grows and the world changes. And that means there's, of course, risk with increasing urbanization, but it also means that cities are critical for successful conservation. We're all conservationists here in this room. And if we're going to protect the bird species and other biodiversity that we care so much about, we need to be thinking about cities. And that's because of a number of reasons. It's because it's where people are, it's where businesses are. They tend to be hubs of commerce and change. And if we can engage those people and businesses in green space and in conservation, then we have a good shot at the future. But it's not just about people. Cities also tend to develop in areas that are incredibly biodiverse. So this is true for New York City and Westchester. The reason that New York City and Westchester are here is because it's growing up in this incredible biodiverse rich area. The same things that make an area good for biodiversity make it good for humans. It's why humans have always been here. This is a rendering of Mannahatta before European arrival, and you can see the smokestacks. There were always many people here. But you can see just how biodiverse this island of Manhattan once was, and this entire region was. You have upland habitats, you have wetlands, you have freshwater creeks, you have so much that's here. And that allows for incredible biodiversity. And the world has changed a lot. This is what the city looks like now. Well, circa 2010.
Yeah.
And what you still see, though, are these little patches of green space that are within the city, and they continue to host incredible biodiversity. We all know this from birding and going out in the nearby areas, that it's kind of some of the best birding and some of the best biodiversity in the world right around here. But again, cities tend to develop where there's incredible biodiversity. And this biodiversity also extends to birds. So New York City provides critical habitat for up to 25 million migratory birds. 25 million migratory birds pass through this city every year. And there's been over 500 species recorded using the city. So this migratory movement and this high number of birds that have been here, it's been coming here long before this city that we know it now has been built. They've been moving through during migration at night, looking for green space, taking advantage of the resources as they continue on their migration. And this is also why it's such an important space for conservation. But when you're thinking about green space, Leslie mentioned going to Brooklyn, being in Brooklyn today and birding out there. That's kind of what we all think about, right? We tend to think of these large green spaces, spaces that are mapped here on the right-hand side that are green spaces throughout New York City that are larger than 2 hectares or 20,000 meters squared. And there's a lot of them, but there's also a lot of space between these green spaces. So one of the things that we're doing as an organization is looking at how do you fill the habitat gap? How do you fill the spaces between these large green spaces with other habitat? By looking at small green spaces, things like, I don't know, Madison Square Park, this tiny little area that has, right near our office actually, that has a surprising amount of biodiversity and also intensely populated by people. But what about bioswales and traffic medians and green roofs? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Because when you look at a city like this is a view of Lower Manhattan, how do you really change this? How do you get more green space in here? These buildings aren't going anywhere. So you're forced to kind of think differently about the existing footprint of this city and all cities by taking the areas that are not green and making them green. So that's the role of green infrastructure. Now, this is a term that's often thrown around, but the way that I'm going to talk about it today is essentially those places that could potentially provide habitat, those places that are vegetated in some form. So things like green roofs or restored floodplains or urban parks that have been modified, detention basins, bioswales, any sort of green space that's been put in on top of impervious surface that changes the way that that area functions. And green infrastructure is incredibly important. We all know how bad flooding can be in areas of the city and nearby. When there's wet weather, we have these antiquated sewer systems. It causes water to flood, mix with raw sewage, and dump out into our waterways. Green space slows that down. It's often why green space is encouraged in cities, is to capture that stormwater, reduce how much stormwater mixes into our sewage system and dumps out over into the waterways. Anybody that's been in New York City also knows that it gets incredibly hot in the summer. Green space stops that. Green space battles the urban heat island. And you can see here just how hot the city gets. The spaces in red are those areas that have the highest vulnerability of heat throughout the city. It's the places where people actually tend to get sick the most because of heat. And they're areas that lack green space. They also coincide with the areas that lack the majority of green space in the city. But it's not just those benefits. Green for infrastructure can also be habitat, like this green roof that is right next to the World Trade Center, as you can see in the background. And you can see a warbler sitting there using that habitat. And that's kind of what we do. And we're trying to figure out how to best encourage this green infrastructure. How do you best understand what is the value of green infrastructure for wildlife conservation? So, for example, it makes sense that maybe Central Park or Prospect Park is a habitat, right? That's obviously good for wildlife conservation. It's why many people go birding there. It's why many birds find their way there. But what about a tiny little green roof like this in Little Italy in Lower Manhattan? It's this little oasis in the middle of otherwise impervious surface. There's very other little green space around it. You see where that pin is, that's a native plant green roof that's surrounded by otherwise just buildings and streets. Is that useful for wildlife conservation? That's what we're trying to get to the answer of. What about green spaces like this that might be rather large but are mostly a monoculture of sedum? How is this useful for biodiversity? The image on the left, this is a large conventional green roof on a building in Manhattan. Or even at a smaller scale, what happens if somebody goes out and puts some planters on top of the roof like this, and you have a very small habitat? Is that also useful for for wildlife conservation? And these are sort of the things that we're trying to understand to figure out how exactly we can change cities and provide more wildlife habitat. And these are some of the spaces that we're working. So we're trying to fill the gaps between these spaces. And we're working in small spaces across the city from the Javits Center, from Kings and Wildflowers, Jefferson Market Garden, all across the city, trying to understand what the role of these green spaces are. And I want to start with one case study. So this case study is actually brand new. This was just completed in that we kicked off the first year last year. In 2025, we have one season of data. We're continuing it, but the results are so amazing that I couldn't help but share. So let's think of kind of the green space that everybody's walked past and might be something that you never really considered, a traffic median. So along Broadway, there's this strip of green space just above where the subway's buried that is known as Broadway Malls. And these are essentially traffic medians that run for 5 miles from about 63rd Street in the Upper West Side up through 165th Street. They go through Harlem and Washington Heights, and they are the Morningside Heights. And there are these incredible green spaces that have kind of otherwise been ignored for a long time. So we kicked off a study to see what is going on in these traffic medians. Are these traffic medians wildlife habitat? So to do this, we set up point counts and transects, which are basically a biologist's tools for quantifying how birds might use an area. And we wanted to answer two main questions. Are birds using the malls, the traffic medians on Broadway? And are they using them more than nearby avenues, or essentially our control site? And then these malls, which are being managed by Broadway Malls Association, which is this incredible organization that has been getting funding to restore their malls and who's engaged us in this work. Broadway Malls is restoring a subset of their habitats. And we're curious, if you restore these traffic medians, these malls, to native plants, do birds start using them? Does it increase bird activity? So you can see some of our results posted here as trip reports on eBird. We did this specifically to get people to start going out to these malls for birding. And you can find some of these reports on eBird if you take a look later on. We're continuing this work into 2026. But what did we find? So this might not be a surprise, but unplanted streets, those control sites that we have on Amsterdam and Columbus, had a few birds. I mean, some of them are nice, right? Downy woodpecker, it was nice to see that, and blue jays on the middle of a street on Amsterdam. But we did this to quantify how big of an impact just this little traffic median that's been planted can be for the stretch of Broadway. So we looked at the control sites like this, the one on the left on Amsterdam Avenue, and compare it with Broadway, where there are planted medians. We found 8 birds on the control sites, 8 bird species using control sites. On Broadway, we found 39 species. This is from one quick season of data. And essentially, planted medians are bringing birds back to Broadway. This is incredible finding. We did not expect to see this many birds this quickly. But some of these birds you can see are sensitive species or species that are long distance migrants. The woes that are in blue are birds that are long distance migrants, birds that are traveling huge distances to and are using its habitat for stopover habitat. For example, the black-polled warbler is here, and that was one of the common birds that we saw using this habitat. And that bird has the largest long distance migration of any songbird in North America. This bird can be traveling from as far away as Alaska to the northern edge of South America, and it stops over in New York City and forages on Broadway. It's an incredible approach to conservation and to dedicated impact of restoration and change along Broadway. And to that question of restoration, we found is that the restored sites, so this is an image of the post-restoration, are doing so much better than the unrestored sites. So these are the sites that were kind of on the majority of the camp, on the majority of the medians. They're sites that oftentimes have English ivy or non-native plants. Well, when you restore them, even though this is pretty new data, we found that right away, both the abundance and species richness is higher in restored sites than non-native unrestored sites. And that was a really quick response. We're going to continue this work to learn more and try to understand what happens if we start converting that 5-mile stretch of traffic median into this rich habitat. What more can our impact be? And this reaches far beyond Broadway, right? I mean, this kind of captures the eye of people that are curious about this because it's amazing, right? Bringing birds back to Broadway, it's just this, you picture Broadway as being this one thing, and then you find out that it's creating this wildlife habitat. And it results in really nice news coverage. So this is some local news coverage. Gotham is the WNYC for New York City, but it's also getting international news coverage on sites like Manga Bay. And what encourages me about this is that there are so many cities and traffic medians are everywhere. And imagine the impact if cities across the world start rethinking those traffic medians to make them more than just an ornamental space. If they start planting habitat in there, that can really change how birds interact with cities. But let's zoom out a bit. So that was an example of kind of the smallest possible site. And there are roads everywhere. You can see those roads coming all through this city. But the majority of what you see when you're looking at kind of like the bird's eye view or a satellite view of a city is this gray space that's mostly buildings. So much of the city is composed of actual buildings just like this. And that's why we want to understand what happens when you take a building that is like this, and you convert it to something that looks like this. This is the Bronx County Courthouse. This is one side of the building, and this is the exact opposite side of the building. What happens when you convert that unused impervious surface on a roof to potential habitat? And that's why we look at green roofs. So you might have heard about green roofs before and kind of have the idea. Essentially, a green roof is a vegetated rooftop. It's when you take a building and you cover it with vegetation. And it's simple in name, but they're actually highly engineered green spaces on top of buildings. There are a bunch of different levels that go into it. There's the vegetation that's chosen based on how deep the soil is. There's a drainage and filter membrane. There's insulation. There's a root barrier. And there's a membrane, several waterproof membrane that would be on a roof anyway. And then, of course, the building itself. And this is kind of like a cross section of what it looks like. You can see my hand pulling up the sedum rolled out there. And green roofs can come in various forms. So the form of the green roof, what it looks like, is largely driven by the structural capacity, essentially how much weight that building can hold, and the cost of how much it's going to be to install and how much a project has to budget out for it. So the lowest weight and the cheapest approach is something like this on the left-hand side. This is an extensive green roof. This is something that's been tested for years across many cities in Europe and does go in up here in New York City because it can go down to 1.5 inches of growing media, very light, with limited maintenance. The opposite side of that is a deep substrate green roof, something that's often called intensive, and that's more of like an intensive garden. So this is actually a photo of that green roof that I mentioned earlier in Little Italy, which has obviously you can see a bunch of different native plants and trees and deeper substrate on this habitat. And it looks differently. So this is extensive roofs tend to be made up of sedum, which is a drought resistant succulent, whereas deeper substrate roofs, intensive roofs have more flowers and trees and plants and more diversity planted into them. When you look at a site like this, it's still sky high, right? So it's on top of a building and it's pretty isolated from all of the green spaces around it. And that's a question of, that's why we want to know is this actually wildlife habitat? Is this a space that wildlife can find their way to? And I actually worked on this for part of my dissertation work, which formed into part of the reason that we're doing this at New York City Bird Alliance. So to answer that kind of basic question of, is this wildlife habitat? I wanted to get an idea of if bird food is present. So one of the things that I did is I went out to a bunch of sites across the city and I set up a green roof site right next door to a non-green conventional site. And I sampled insects and birds. Well, I watched for birds and recorded for birds, and I collected insects on both sites. So whatever I did to one green roof, I also did to the nearby conventional roof, kind of trying to get the idea of what is the baseline. So you can see that these are insect traps set out on a conventional roof in the city. Um, and what I found is that there is so much more food on a green roof than a conventional roof. It just makes sense. There's habitat there. In the spring and the summer, there is an incredible difference between the abundance, the number of insects that are out there, and the richness of birds, of insects that are on these roofs. Insects are a key food source for birds. Insectivores specifically love going out and they require these insects on their migrating or while they're raising their young. Having insects present is incredibly important. That's why native plants are so important because native plants co-involve with insects and you can have more insects available. And green roofs are covered in insects, beneficial insects, which means that birds are able to find and use abundant food resources on green roofs. So it's not just insects, it's also things like fruits or cleaning insects off of plants. But what we're seeing is that birds that are breeding and migrating are using green roofs. They're coming through and finding these small sky-high habitats and foraging on them and using them as an unconventional green space. And they're coming through in incredibly high numbers. In fact, 60% of New York City's passerine species that are regularly spotted in New York City are using green roofs as stopover habitat. You would be shocked to see, just like in that first slide that I shared, how many birds would build up into these small green spaces. There are spots in Lower Manhattan that have that when we're out surveying, there's this incredible fallout of birds as they're trying to navigate otherwise impervious surface, and they're looking for some lifeline. Green roofs provide that lifeline for birds to land, find find enough food to rest and refuel, and move on either to a larger green space or to continue their migration. Relatively few birds breed on green roofs, so actually use it as nesting habitat. We found American robins up there. Northern mockingbirds tend to love green roofs, and then heron gulls nest on one of the largest roofs in the city. Otherwise, a lot of the birds are nesting nearby and using the green roofs as foraging habitat. We've also recorded across other cities species like killdeer on large, expansive green roofs, kind of really large ones that look like fields. Not many birds actually nest on these green roofs. except for a few key species. But it's not just birds. Bats are all over these roofs too. So New York City has 5 species of bat that are recorded in it, and all 5 species have been recorded on green roofs, particularly the eastern red. So what's amazing about eastern red bats is that they are primarily feeding on moths. And what we found on research on green roofs in the city is that when moths are present, when moths are on the roof, there are also bats there foraging in mass. So it's not just birds. When we go to sleep, bats are out foraging overhead, eating these insects that are all over these green roofs. Green roofs are habitat for not just birds, but they're habitat for insects and bats. And this is just kind of a quick glimpse at it. So these birds are also wintering here. So we have juncos and white-throated sparrows spending their entire winter on green roofs in the city. And it's some birds that you normally wouldn't expect. I mean, there's incredible warblers that are always surprising us up there. We even had an eastern meadowlark on one of the green roofs this past year. It's just these shocking things that are continuing to break our expectations of habitat use in urban areas. But it's not just about what's there. So there are obviously going to be certain things that make green roofs better than others, just like all habitats. So some green roofs are going to be better than others because they have higher habitat quality, right? A native plant green roof, a plant with that's a building that's been covered with plants that are will evolve to the area, is going to perform better. It's going to have more insects, just like a ground level garden would. Um, but it also comes down to things like size and location. So size is going to have a big bearing as to what bird species can find it and use it, just like the species area relationship. The same rules that are governed across ecology are applying to green roofs. And then location specifically, we're finding is having a big role in this. So by that, I mean landscape context matters. So a green roof that looks like this is an example of a green roof that was installed by New York City Parks. This is on top of a Parks building in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. And the same planting palette is on top of this building. When you install a green roof in the middle of a larger habitat, it doesn't get used as much. Birds aren't going to leave a better habitat to go to one that's used less often. But that habitat that's in the middle of Little Italy, that roof is covered in birds. When you have no other option for these birds to go through, these green roofs can be incredibly surprising as to what can find their way there and provide that essential lifeline for survival in a space that lacks green space. But there are a lot of important considerations to think about when designing green roofs. So green roofs, for example, should never be considered as a replacement for ground level habitat. It's really great when we have a building and we're trying to reclaim some habitat, but I would never advocate for clearing a habitat and installing a rooftop green space. That's not going to make up for it. Green roofs are complex and engineered by people, and they're not going to have that complexity that a ground level green space will have. Likewise, it's really important that green roofs are designed to be bird safe, like what you see here with this bird safe windbreak. These little dots make this glass visible to birds, and it turns it into a habitat element as opposed to something that's lethal. And this general rule should be true for all gardens and sanctuaries across the world. If we're providing important habitat, we should also be providing bird safe glass alongside of it because it is the leading driver of bird mortality in North America. So I want to end with a case study in positive change that kind of pulls together all of this change and possibility into one nice building, one nice story. So this is the Jacob Javits Convention Center. This is the largest convention center in New York City, and I think one of the largest in the nation. Many of you have probably been there if you've gone to like Comic-Con or the car show or New York Build, which is happening later this week. This is a space where tens of thousands of people come through for these big events. This building goes from 34th Street up to 40th Street. It's this extremely large building with, as you can see here, a lot of glass. This is the Javits Center circa 2010. So this building was composed entirely of this reflective dark glass, and it was one of the biggest bird killers in New York City. So this building would kill between 4,000 and 5,000 birds a year. And through some of our other work, Project Safe Flight, we're monitoring this building. We found this data, and we were able to advocate for change. So through a partnership with the Javits Center, we're able to get some change in place. And all of that dark reflective glass was replaced with bird safe glass, and a green roof was installed. So this is the result of the efforts there to change this building. So this building went from being known as Darth Vader, the neighborhood really didn't like it, to being kind of this icon of sustainability because it went from having bird killing glass to bird safe glass. In the first year, right away, collisions reduced by about 90%. And instead of just being a barren rooftop, it now had habitat on top of the roof. And in this first year, we started monitoring. We've continued monitoring since then. And what we found is that over 20% of New York City's bird species are now using the habitats provided by Javits. Notice how I said using as opposed to colliding with. They're using the habitats. And here's a phoebe that we captured with one of our with one of our motion sensor cameras on top of the roof. Here's a phoebe, which is a flycatcher doing its flycatcher thing. And this is just an incredible change that's happened on this building. And Javits Center found so much benefit from this that when they built their expansion, they went a step further. They went ahead and installed a building that could actually support more weight. So now the new Javits Center, the new expansion, has a rooftop farm that you see here. This is one of the common yellowthroats that loves foraging in this space. You can also see a group of mourning doves that are taking advantage of the sunflowers here. It has a farm. It has a blueberry patch. It has a native plant garden, and it has a food forest with about 40 apple trees in it, and a rich understory of native plants called the food forest. And Javits really went from a bird killer to bird habitat. And then on that extensive roof, on that roof that was initially installed, it's turned into the largest colony of nesting herring gulls in the entire area. So there's over 160 nesting pairs out there. And what happens now is rather than Javits employees stepping over dead birds to get into the building, they're now coming into work excited to engage in conservation, and they join us up there to band. If you ever see an orange band over white lettering, orange band with white lettering, it's probably one of the gulls that hatched on Javits, and I'm sure you see them because these birds are showing up all around the area. They're also showing up as far south as Tampa, Florida, as far west as Texas, and as far north as Toronto. This one building that made this change with green infrastructure is having an impact across the entire coastline. And one of the things that I particularly like about the expansion is that bird safe glass is a featured design element. You can see all of the beautiful green roof here through bird safe glass, which is a big step because people are often afraid of bird safe glass. And this makes it look entirely different. This is something that anybody would enjoy having a view of. And it's good for business. This is something that Javits Center leads with when they're explaining their impact. Sustainability is very in. People wanted to have an impact. So when you're having an event, going to a space that has a farm and provides habitat for dozens of species and nesting herring gulls, it can make a difference. And it also gets good coverage, right? So this is some recent coverage of the Javits Center that I encourage you all to take a look at. This one in particular is a really nice view of bird safe glass and the nesting herring gull the nesting herring gull colony that's up there. This is this was done by PBS, and this is kind of earned media. This gets attention to Javits Center for doing a good thing, and when it's a business, it pulls more people in, and it gets people to think about Javits Center in a different way. But what's also important, and one of the reasons that we've had so much change in New York City, is we can point to examples like this where there was a change, it reduced bird collisions, it provided habitat, now there's all these species up there, and we can actually document how this has been good for New York City. And that's one of the reasons that through our research, we've been able to get New York City to have systemic change. So we now have comprehensive bird safe building legislation. Local Law 15, it requires every new building in New York City to be built with bird safe glass in the bottom 75 feet of the building. We also have lights out legislation that requires city-owned and occupied buildings to turn their lights out during migration. But it doesn't stop there. It also goes to the main topic of today, green roof legislation. We've been able to get in place requirements for green roofs across the city. So this, as the city continues to grow, any new building that's being built or major renovation that's basically destroying the roof has to have a green roof or a solar roof installed. It's a very different future. That's a future where habitat is all across the city. We also have a really nice incentive, if you know anybody that's in the city, specifically in areas that have high rates of heat-related mortality or lack of green space or CSO issues. We have a green roof tax abatement that we're able to get in place. And essentially what this does is it pays for the vast majority of a green roof to be installed through a break in your taxes. So the green roof tax abatement. You get even more money back. You get money back across the entire city, but you get the most money if you're in a priority area, an area that has the greatest need for a green roof. So that's why I really think that this is the future of cities. This is a herring gull nest in Midtown Manhattan on a building that has bird safe glass and is providing habitat for incredible numbers of birds. And this is how we have a more livable future. This is how we have a city, a future where there are birds abundant everywhere. We start rethinking what cities can be, installing green space, and we're going to have a future where conservation is successful. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Oh, thank you so much, Dustin. Wonderful, wonderful work. Mind blown that the traffic medians and the farm on the Javits Center. I love this. Does anyone have any questions to start with? I know I have a few, but please feel free to unmute yourselves and jump in.
So this is Gail. I want to ask a question. Does Javits Center, have they realized any reduction in their like air conditioning bill or anything like that that you can also point to? Because I would think, you've been very successful in getting these tax breaks for putting these in, for installing green roofs and putting in bird safe glass. But, oftentimes people will point to, oh, there's the expense of doing this. It's not built into my budget. I can't do this. Um, are there other things that you can point to that will help sell this concept based on a dollars and cents or revenue and standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a really good question, and I of course focus just on the habitat value of this because it's often overlooked. But a lot of that dollar and cents benefit comes from one thing that you pointed out, the insulation. But it's insulation, it's heating and cooling reduction through airflow, and it's stormwater capture. All of those things save money. So just to start with insulation, it just kind of makes sense. When you're putting green infrastructure on top of a building, it's like putting a jacket on. You're covering it, that layer of insulation that helps reduce how much escaping in the winter or how much or how much heat's getting in the summer. That does have a direct benefit, and that's been quantified many times around many different types of buildings. There's an incredible amount of cost savings right there. But also, I don't know if you noticed in the photo, a lot of the HVAC units are on the roof. So the heating and cooling units, and those tend to be up on roofs. And when you install a green roof, that's alongside of it, the air over a green roof is much cooler. That urban heat island is reduced. So those HVAC units are functioning in a cooler environment, which means there's less of a change that they need to make to further cool the building. Solar panels function better on top of green roofs because the air is cooler. Solar panels function better when it's not boiling hot out. And then there's, of course, the stormwater capture. So in the city, there are strong regulations about the need for stormwater capture, and green roofs are encountered for that. So rather than installing a subsurface cistern to capture stormwater, you can install a green roof, and that makes a big benefit. Um, there is also a great green roof program through the DEP. So in New York City for many years, the main focus of green roofs was about stormwater capture. And the DEP, the New York City DEP, who manages stormwater in the city, they have the Green Infrastructure Grant Program, which essentially pays for the entire cost of a green roof on top of your building. And it just covers everything. The reason it doesn't get used that often is because of restrictive covenant of, I think, 20 years. So you have to pay it back if you sell the building or destroy the green roof within 20 years. But it's a nice benefit that just also shows that there is a tangible benefit to the city and a dollar and cents difference.
Great, thank you.
I'm wondering if the NYC Bird Alliance or other organizations proactively approach locations and buildings that don't currently have green roofs about considering doing it. Is that something that's done, or how are they made aware?
Yeah, we don't necessarily proactively reach out unless there is. I shouldn't say that. We have a number of initiatives underway where we are working to get more green roofs in place. It's not necessarily cold outreach; it's through some other relationship, or a organization might come to us and kind of be like, okay, I'd like to increase my biodiversity impact. Like I have these goals for increasing biodiversity. How could I do it? And then we talk to them about green roofs and bird safe glass. We also have an initiative underway right now, trying to basically at the landscape level connect businesses that are disconnected from one another to drive towards a landscape level change by directing them to invest in certain ways. So if they have $10,000 to put towards some benefit, if there's a habitat nearby that has nesting habitat, but what's needed is maybe a grassland for foraging, we'll suggest that that building will add a grassland habitat. And we're trying to piece together these built habitats through a network of green spaces to have impact.
Great. Do you work with community gardens at all? Do community gardens have an impact on this?
Absolutely. Yeah. So community gardens and small green spaces are a major part of this. One spot that has been incredible that we just started working is Jefferson Market Garden, which is down in Greenwich Village. It's this tiny little pocket park that, again, is just covered with birds. And it's making such a big difference. And the little slight adjustments that improve the habitat make it a space that is even greater, finds even greater use. And spaces like that, they really, again, we're learning so much. This is a new field of study. So that building, that green space in particular is shocking because there's essentially no other green space nearby except for maybe some spaces between brownstones. But there are catbirds that are nesting there.
Oh, wow.
And catbirds you think of as needing a larger green space, but they're nesting in this kind of tiny little pocket park that, and they're finding everything they need there and amongst these tiny other little green spaces and green roofs that are right nearby.
That's wonderful. We have a question in the chat from Carolyn McLaughlin. Are you doing any projects in the South Bronx?
Yeah. So there are a number of projects in the South Bronx, but most of those are around water birds. So the South Bronx, we are particularly focused on South Brother Island and the other islands that are in the South Bronx that have important wading bird habitat. However, one of the things, and I'm glad to see Christian's here.
Yes,
One
I
of
was
the things
just
that we did, yeah,
to
one of the things
introduce
that
you.
we, yeah, so Christian with Bronx River Alliance is an incredible partner. And hi, Christian. And one of the things that we started doing with Bronx River Alliance is looking at the impact of restoration of green space restoration on foraging water birds. So because that island in the South Bronx, South Brother Island, has the largest remaining colony of wading birds in the entire Northeast, the Bronx River and the habitats along it are really important for foraging so that they could successfully raise their young. So one of the things that we've been doing in collaboration is going out and surveying how restoration, green infrastructure along the river has influenced wading bird foraging. And what we've seen is that green spaces are having a tremendous impact. This restorations are having a huge impact. And there's definitely a difference in how these birds are foraging between when we started the survey, or the first run of the survey, which was, I think, in 2010, and the last couple of years, 2024 and 2025. As habitats mature, it shifts where birds are foraging. And Christian's organization is doing incredible work along the way to make all of this possible.
Wonderful. Yes, we honored the Bronx River Alliance at our annual meeting last year, and I figured the two of you already know each other, but just in case, I was about to mention that Christian is with us tonight. A few more questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions they want to speak out loud before I read them all? I'll just jump to them then. Barbara Spiridon asks, any plans to reach out to the New York City Department of Education and propose green roofs for New York City public grammar schools? It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's something that we've been pushing for a very long time. In particular, my colleague Vicky Sando. Vicky has been really leading some incredible work in the space. She has managed for years a green roof on PS 41 and been pushing the Department of Education to start installing more because of all the benefits. And when you put it on a school, not only is it wildlife habitat, stormwater, cooling, all these other things, it's also a living lab. So Vicky and in collaboration with Vicky, we created a curriculum for schools that have green roofs and for K through 12 students to go out into a green roof and use it. So far, there have been a number of green roofs that are going in on city schools, but it hasn't been a major uptake yet. I would love for the Department of Education to mandate that this is a change. There are a bunch of challenges around it, but I think that would be, if there was one thing that the city could do, that would be a great way to approach it and require city-owned buildings to have green roofs on public schools.
Yes, I would love to see that. I'm sure we all would. Carol Allen asks, what effect, if any, is there of solar panels on bird strikes? Good question.
So solar panels seem to be completely independent of bird strikes, at least in this area. So birds don't really strike solar panels because they don't have that reflective component. So birds strike glass for two major reasons. It's reflective or it's clear and they don't see it there. Kind of the same reasons that we walk into glass, right? Well, we don't walk into it for reflections, but I'm sure everybody here has walked into a door at some point because you don't see a barrier there. It's the same thing happens with birds. They don't see a barrier, they collide. And when a bird is flying from Alaska to South America and spends most of its time in a boreal forest or a tropical forest, when it comes in and lands in a city and it sees a reflection on a window, it doesn't know that that's a window just because there's a frame around it. So they go to fly into that habitat that they see in the reflection because they think that reflection is real and they collide. So that's the main driver of collisions. For solar panels, which are usually horizontal, pointed up towards the sun, and they're not reflective, there's really no case of that. Though I have heard cases of solar panels in very arid areas being mistaken for water and water birds trying to land on them thinking that they're water. But that's not an issue in this region.
Interesting. Carol also asks, have you been working with community boards in the hottest areas of the city to spread the word about the health effects of green roofs?
Yeah, it's a great idea. When we were working on the Green Roof Tax Abatement, the hottest areas in the city, and this was done with a bunch of colleagues at the Nature Conservancy and Swim Coalition, and we were working hard to basically identify those areas that have the highest rate of heat-related vulnerability. That was the number one thing that went into deciding where a priority district would be. So currently, the way that that tax break works is that you get $10 per square foot back anywhere in the city. But if you're in a priority district, an area that has those highest rates of heat-related mortality or vulnerability, then you get $15 a square foot back. You get a lot more money back. And when we did that, we did a lot of outreach to electeds that are in those neighborhoods to kind of promote it that way, and to go through rather than reaching out to individual community boards. But we do have relationships with community boards across the city, and that's one of the things that we do kind of talk about in addition to many other aspects of our work.
Great. Well, my next question is, we have urban areas right here in Westchester, of course, right here in our chapter's territory. We have New Rochelle, we have Mount Vernon and other nearby areas with skyscrapers going up. And do you have any recommendations for how we can get any of this enacted in our own area? The laws, the tax abatements, the green roofs, any of it. We need help doing this here. I think as far as it seems to me, Connecticut has done a better job maybe than Lower Westchester has in creating bird safe habitat, at least lights out laws. And we're lagging. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for us.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've learned in New York City is that there are two important things. So one is data. So that's why we invest a lot in collecting our own data. Though I don't think you don't need to recreate the wheel, right? We have data right nearby. You can use any of our data. And if you're going into there, you can go in ready to show that when you install a green roof, you can expect to have this many species, this sort of cost savings in energy. If you turn your lights out, the benefits of that. So having data and case studies is really powerful. And again, as partners right nearby, we're happy to share what we use. The other part of this, and this sounds counterintuitive to say this as a bird organization, but it's not all about birds, right? When we're meeting with people in the city, we care passionately about birds, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't care about birds or biodiversity. So it's important to position the work that you want to get achieved, whether it's bird safe glass or green roofs, in the framework that it's really about people. And the way that we do that is what we talk about is that what's good for birds is good for people, right? Green roofs are good for birds. Green roofs are also very good for people. Bird safe glass, obviously good for birds, also good for people because you don't have to be stepping over dead birds. You don't have to have that horrible experience, which I'm sure everybody in this room has had, of that moment when a bird hits a window, and it kind of ruined your day. So this is about helping people, especially around light. Light is one of those things that there's so much light trespass and damage to the night sky, which is habitat. But also there's so much data out there that shows that it's not just about birds, it's about plants, insects, nocturnal animals, and our own health. We are healthier when we have less light trespass and we're sleeping in darker areas. So very much, I would say, use data and show that it's not just about saving birds. It's about increasing quality of life overall for everyone.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Anyone else have any questions? If not, I would like to wrap up and thank Dustin again so much for this wonderful presentation. Yes, and for the great work that you all are doing, you personally, your organization. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for spending part of your evening with us and for caring about all of this. We hope to see you on some future walks and more speaker programs. And please keep in mind the camp scholarships. We also, our chapter also provides grants for native plant gardens. Please keep that in mind, especially if you know any place that's interested in installing a green roof, a green median near us or in our general region. And thank you all so much. This recording will be online on our website eventually. And have a great rest of your evening. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.